Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me on Their Fight Story. I have Ryan White with us. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being here. How did you start with MMA? How did you get involved in it?
So for me, it was kind of a big 180. Because growing up, like in high school, I was more of the kid who was like, let's do drugs and play music,
Oh,
and I was like, I was about like 300 pounds, just like, and like I said, my life was largely just like smoking weed, playing music, eating a ton of crap, and then like reading comic books. That was my thing. and
wow.
it's but as a nerd, I was like, martial arts had always interested me.
Yeah.
And so one day I started working with a guy who went to South Shore Sport Fighting, and he invited me down. So the first day too, he brought me in during off hours, and like we kind of moved around a little bit. And so up until that point, all I had done was like a little karate, which like yeah, largely nonsense. But like in hindsight, my old teacher, like he at least had a spar, and I was a little mean, so I was at least like comfortable like hitting and getting hit. And so we'd move around, and he kind of talked himself up a lot. And so I thought he was really good. It turned out he wasn't. Like so I kind of beat him up. And so I was like, oh, all right, well, this is what MMA is. This will just be fun. And so
Yeah.
then I came in during a regular session, and I got the shit kicked out of me so bad. Like, because what I didn't know was that he then went kind of like talk crap to me to everybody there. and and so like it's funny, it's like the owner, Bill Mahoney, who's been my coach now for 15 years,
Mhm.
he, like says that he had been expecting Jean-Claude Van Damme to walk through, and it turned that he was like, oh, it was like Jonah Hill, because I had like and all that, and so yeah, then they beat the crap out of me for like a week trying to get me to quit because he had told everyone I was a dick, but I didn't because I was too dumb to,
Yeah.
and so yeah, and then it pretty much became my life from there forward.
So how did it change your life?
So for me, like I would say the biggest thing is that was the first time I really wanted anything.
Yeah.
Because like I'm one of those like generally listless kids who was just kind of floating around, not really like had no goals, no ambition, and but this gave me something tangible that I wanted, because I really wanted to fight. I fell in love with it pretty fast, and so through that ended, I ended up devoting myself to it. Ultimately, I ended up losing like, God, overall probably like 120 pounds to have my first fight, which was at 165. And I was, like I said, I was close to 300 when I first started. But I was fortunate to be where I ended up at South Shore because Bill really understood how to sort of, get me, kind of like string me along to keep me motivated. Because if he just came out and was like, dude, you have to lose 100 pounds or it's not going to happen for you,
Mhm.
then I mean, at that point, I would have probably been like, man, you know what, that sounds really hard, so fuck that. But he was always good at being like, I get to like 230 and then we'll talk. Then like get to under 200 pounds, then we'll talk. So we like gave me these like smaller goals that just seemed more realistic, and so I was able to get those. And then through that, because I really like started to fall in love with the lifestyle, I ended up becoming a fitness coach and ended up, becoming a nutrition one from there. And so really like everything in my life right now, I can attribute to mixed martial arts. Because while I obviously, never fought in the UFC, I was never like a real pro, and that was all I did, and that was how I made my living. It was the springboard into everything else I did. Because even as a trainer, my big appeal at first was that I was a fighter, and people liked that. And so that was kind of like my thing. Because at the time, too, like I started in 2005. And so the sport wasn't really big at that point.
Mhm.
So like the second season of The Ultimate Fighter had just happened. And so like the sport was like kind of starting to be on everybody's like radar, but it didn't quite hit yet. Because I would say it probably peaked in like 2010 when it was like Brock Lesnar, George St. Pierre, and all that. And then while it still obviously grew and got bigger, it was more incremental. But prior to that, it was barely known by anybody. Like if you told everybody that you were an MMA fighter, they'd probably say something like, "Oh, my nephew does Taekwondo" or something like that.
Yeah.
Nobody really got what it was. But yeah, I mean, it really like on a very fundamental level changed every aspect of my life.
And when you started fighting, how many fights did you have? Did you ever turn pro?
Yeah, so I was 7-2 as a pro. I actually fought as on the very first amateur card, and at the time, like, the only real difference was that the pros were getting paid and the amateurs wasn't, or
Hmm.
they weren't. And so Bill was even like, it's kind of a scam. The promoters are just trying to save money, so we're just so like after that he just put me into a pro fight a couple months
Okay.
later. It's like because there just wasn't much of a difference, and like they didn't have like the unified rules like they do
Okay.
now. So like my first pro fight was in a boxing ring, and it was like 2 5-minute rounds, and if you needed an overtime one, they'd give you it. And and like so like the rules are very weird. Like actually, I remember like because the athletic commission wasn't even involved,
Hmm.
so I remember there was a point where Bellator wanted me on that show Fight Master,
Okay.
but it didn't end up happening because there was no record of like my first 4 fights, so it only showed I had like 3, and they were like, well, you need a minimum of like 5. And so just because like, but that's just a statement to how like in disarray the sport was around here, because we were largely self-governed. Like nobody really turned in medicals or did anything like that. We just had to do it, you know.
Yeah. You said you did your fitness instructor. I was gonna say, how did you incorporate that with your fighters?
So I ended up becoming almost like almost accidentally kind of like the in-gym strength coach for our guys,
Okay.
especially during kind of like the more recent years, because it's just become such a need for the sport
Mhm.
because now that it's so big and we have like we have not only people who know everything, but everybody's pretty much a good athlete too, whereas before you could not really lift and you'd
Yeah.
probably still be fine if you were good enough. But now, like, strength and conditioning is such a pivotal part of the sport that your athleticism needs to be there, or you're not going to be able to be competitive. And so, with a lot of the guys here, I'm generally like their first lifting instructor.
Saw on Facebook that you wrote a book.
Yes, I did.
What
It's
is your book about?
So it's called Getting Off the Roller Coaster, a beginner's guide to fitness, nutrition, and the mindset for lasting weight loss. And so basically, like, so the title kind of says it all. It's about,
Yeah.
it's weight. But yeah, I tried to be really descriptive of that.
Mission
But,
complete.
but I kind of use my story as a bit of a cautionary tale there because I was always one of those guys who, like I said, I grew up really heavy, which means, and generally when you see that, and this is why I have like issues with shows like The Biggest Loser and stuff.
Yeah.
When you see somebody who like morbidly obese, they have emotional issues. They
Mhm.
don't need Jillian Michaels yelling at them. They need a
Yeah.
therapist. and, and so while I got good at losing weight, like I'm very good at that, I was never good at keeping it off, because generally my main motivation for losing weight was always just fighting. And so then when the fight was gone, I would then eat whatever the hell I wanted in sight. And generally, you'd say things like, well, I deserve it. I worked really hard and I know I can lose it again and all that. And so I would go from literally sometimes eating like 1,500 calories a day to then suddenly eating 5 or 6,000 calories a day and just eating all sorts of garbage and waste. Because what happened was just my dysfunctional relationship with food was still there, but I just had like a relatively superficial motivation for losing it, and that's a fight contract. But the issue with that is that when the fight goes away, then there's suddenly no motivation to. And since I knew I was good at losing weight, I didn't really care about keeping it off,
Mhm.
because generally too, especially at the time, it was easy to kind of know who you were fighting 2 months in advance. So I'd be like, oh, that's plenty of time. And so while most of my fights were at 170 pounds, I would usually walk at like 210, sometimes even 220, and then just like lose it all. And so I was, that's kind of why the book's called Getting Off the Roller Coaster, because that's what it was, like very highs and very lows, and very highs and very lows. And I don't want to say it gave me an eating disorder because I feel like that's dramatic and probably diminishes the people who have like real eating disorders that end up needing to see clinicians and all that. But it definitely reinforced a very unhealthy relationship with food. And unfortunately, I see that in a lot of fighters too.
Mhm.
While this book isn't necessarily for fighters, I do think there is some benefit that they can get from that. because especially like, you know, looking back, I had to give up on a lot of opportunities that I could have had to fight more, and then maybe my career would have gone further than it did if I had stayed in that ready place where I was just able to, whenever I needed to, get down to that weight and just stay like a good athlete year round. But I was somebody who, like my ego had always come from my intellect, not my athleticism. Like I
Mhm.
was good in spite of being a bad athlete. So I didn't really, that wasn't really something that I needed to care about. If anything, it made me feel good that I was successful in spite of like not being super athletic. And, you know, like I always had to work really hard to be a very mediocre athlete. And I just always had the, you know, that unhealthy relationship. But if that had changed, then maybe I could, you know, my career could have gone further because I definitely had to pass on a lot of opportunities, and I see that with you know some fighters locally, and I've known a couple really good examples of that, because especially like if you look at the UFC's model right now,
Mhm.
unless you're one of the name guys, it's, you know, you don't really have 2 3 months to know, you know, to prepare for a fight anymore. They're giving you maybe 4 or 5 weeks, sometimes less. Like Mike Rodriguez is fighting again on a week from Saturday, and on the 12th, and he just fought, you know, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, we're seeing a lot of guys have really quick turnarounds, and that can't happen if you're one of those guys who's going to, you know, balloon up,
Mhm.
especially with the sports initiative to get rid of, you know, extreme weight cutting, as they call it.
Would you consider fighting again?
Oh, I would love to. That actually is one of my goals. Because initially the main reason why I had stepped away from fighting was because I wanted to focus on, you know, sort of my career, my profession,
Mhm.
and you know at the time I was in the process of starting a gym, and so I knew that would take a lot of my focus, and so but also too, and I'd had the talk with Bill that I was like, you know, it has occurred to me that I've never really gotten control of my health. For me, it's always been for, you know, for this, and I want to learn how to do that for me. And unfortunately that took me way too long, because that was like 4 years ago. You know, but like, you know, and so but I'm now like kind of like at that point where, I mean, I'm not a competition weight now, but I'm feeling better than I have in a long time. I'm at that, you know, I'm currently at a weight where I feel like I can move well, and so yeah, that's something I'm really considering. And so that I would say that is one of my goals, probably within the next year.
Wait, like for 2021?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, there probably won't be any fights in 2020, and so like, you know, I'd say I want to lose probably 20 to 30
Okay.
to like be a place where I'm like, okay, I could, you know, I could cut to like 170 or something like that.
And now, have you ever competed in Naga? Because I see you have your shirt.
Oh yeah. So I do those a lot. Um, I would like to, you know, because I just started like competing even in that again last year, and or maybe the year before. I don't really remember. Time's kind of having a weird blurry effect, you know.
Okay.
And but because even that, like, because you know, I had let myself get really heavy, you know, since I had walked away from fighting. Because again, the fights weren't there, so neither was the motivation. And so even Naga, where nobody's trying to punch me in the face, while I feel comfortable competing there, I'm not competitive. And so like, so it got to the point where I was like, okay, I really like need to figure this shit out. And so that was kind of led me to kind of doing the, you know, internal work that's really important for, you know, those people who are so far gone that their emotions are dictating all of these really unhealthy behaviors. You know, that stuff just really, you know, needs to happen, and it's unfortunately something a lot of people ignore. You
Yeah.
know, you always hear like, you know, the fun new diet or the trendy new exercise that's gonna, or the piece of equipment or the supplement that's gonna do it, but people don't need tactics. Like weight loss isn't generally a knowledge issue, it's a behavioral one. Like there's nobody who doesn't know that they shouldn't drink beer and eat pizza every day, but there are still plenty of people who you know, it's like we
Yeah.
do things that we know are bad for us all of the time.
Yeah.
If, you know, but we do it anyway. And so it's important for people to realize why they're doing those behaviors. Like that's something I do with a lot of my clients. That's something I finally started doing with myself. Because for a while I was really good at getting the bottom of that with everybody else, but I would happily ignore me. And so, so like really over the past year, that was when I started kind of devoting myself to figuring out my own shit and getting my own house in order with that stuff. And that was a big part of what inspired me to write the book.
Okay, I was just gonna ask, like, what inspired you? Like, what really motivated you to actually sit down and be like, you know what, this is what I'm gonna do?
So, I mean, I think because I do think that is an important thing for people to know, for regular people and even fighters, is understanding why we make the choices we do. Because again, I know several top local fighters who, the moment they're off the scale, for their fight's over, they'll put on 30 to 40 pounds, and that's ultimately going to could be a hindrance to their careers. I'm not going to call it here because I don't want to embarrass them, but it's one of those things that like those people, just like your soccer mom who I might train, everybody needs to figure that out. I mean, really, there shouldn't be anything we do where we can't be able to tell ourselves why we're doing it. But I feel like we do a lot of things on autopilot, and I would like to be able to help people achieve a greater state of self-awareness, because that makes the other stuff easier. They don't need, in general, new tactics. They need to figure out why their behavior is so dysfunctional.
Now, you say that this book isn't really for fighters, but it is, because
It certainly can be. Like I said, there are definitely some universal things in there that everybody can know. And like I do talk a little bit about tactics and stuff, but but the inner work's really important. It's something that's often neglected. I feel like we are seeing, kind of a bit of a rise in that. Like for instance, even Conor McGregor, pretty famously, like it got coached by Tony Robbins, leading into his comeback fight against Cowboy, and that was probably the best Conor McGregor we've seen in a couple of years. And so we're seeing more people start to care about that. And I hope to see more people getting like a sports psychologist or somebody like that, an actual clinician who can sort of guide them in the right direction. But there always has been a stigma against doing like that sort of inner work, even with like a regular therapist. And like my dad and my stepmom are both therapists, so I very much grew up in that culture. But for a lot of people, I feel like there's still that attitude that there has to be something like crazy about you to go see it, and so they don't want to go see somebody like that, because that would be admitting to themselves that they're crazy, or that there's something wrong with them, and that's just simply not true. And so yeah, I mean these are universal things that people can do, and obviously I'm not a therapist, but some of the exercises that I talk about in the book can help you with, develop that greater sense of self-awareness, which can in turn help you make better decisions, especially when you figure out what you really want to do. Because like I said, I know plenty of people who tell me they want to be fighters, but then they certainly don't live like that. And it's become something that you have to live. There is no halfway. You're either in it or you're not.
well, this will definitely help, because it's a mindset, it's a lifestyle, and this will help.
100%. Because again, this isn't a sport that you can do part time. I mean, like obviously it is for a lot of people. Like they need to like work real jobs. um, but it's something that you have to be completely devoted to, and the consequences of not being completely devoted to it can be dire. Because you can get really hurt if you're just doing it halfway. And I've seen careers end because they had one foot in and one foot out. And so we have so much talent here on the New England scene, and I think there are a lot of guys who can really make a go at it if they can get their house in order internally.
Yes, most definitely. When you were doing your weight cut from those big extreme weight cuts, did you ever experience anything negative? Like, how some people have like either they're just too dehydrated because they cut way too much too quickly, or things like that?
So fortunately, I didn't. Like I did have a couple instances where my kidneys were definitely sore, and so like that could have potentially led to something pretty bad. and
Wow.
but but fortunately, it wasn't ever too crazy. I mean, I remember there was a point where I went from 215 to 165 over the course of about 4 weeks.
Oh my
And
God.
yeah, and that wasn't fun. But fortunately, like with that, I definitely remember being fucked up by the weight cut, and I had no strength in the actual fight. Fortunately, as little strength as I had, my opponent had less, and so
Oh,
I was able to, so I was able to win. But yeah, it definitely also too got to the point where the older I got, the tougher it was to do those cuts. Because I was able to, like, at 23, I could be an idiot about it, and I would still like just lose the weight. But even at 28 or 29, that was much more difficult. And so now I don't like cutting more than like 12 pounds to do anything. and like that, I feel like I can do pretty safely. Like I have, like, we have a pretty good system. Actually, Johnny Campbell from my gym ended up sort of teaching me his cutting method, and I used it for the last Naga I did, and I felt great. I was able to suck out like 12 pounds easy, and yeah, that was fine. But a big part of it is making sure I don't need to diet down 30 pounds to then cut 12. It's like, because also what happens there when you see people who do rapid weight loss,
mhm.
a lot of that weight loss is generally your body dumping water and glycogen from your body. So you're already partially dehydrated when you step in the sauna.
Yeah.
And in generally, like, the common, the kind of the common sense rule of it is that you can dehydrate up to 10% of your body weight. But if you're already, somewhat dehydrated when you get in, you're getting an artificial look at that, because you're really heavier than the scale is currently telling you. And I definitely ran into that a couple times. And actually, like, so the last fight I had lost was against Jesse Merritt, who used to fight locally. I think he lives out in California now. But that was a fight where I both missed weight because I miscalculated the weight cut, but I had also cut, cut to the point where I just felt like complete garbage, and it showed in the fight. And so that one had me, looking up at the lights from the canvas pretty quick. and, but that was a fight where I was already dehydrated and like, okay, now I'm gonna cut 15 pounds, and that just wasn't happening. So I
Mhm.
remember, like, I barely stand upright, and I was like a pound and a half off or something like that.
I can't even imagine because I mean, I tried. Like, you know what? I actually tried. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna try to see how the fighters do it. I'm gonna try to like do it. It lasted maybe like 1 week, and I was like, yeah, I totally like if I were gonna fight, I would totally miss weight. This is not. And I really tried, but it's not easy at all. Like the weight, I mean, the training is one thing, the eating is another, and then what people don't understand is you have all these other things going around in your life that is a factor. Like, okay, now you can have a family emergency. Now you have to work overtime at your job, or maybe your child gets sick, or you know what I mean. There's so many other things that are happening that it pulls you away. But so it's not that you don't want to be there 100%. It's just not easy. So
Oh,
with this,
absolutely. Absolutely. Like the amount of mental fortitude that a
yeah,
fighter needs is absurd. To be able to, like, because especially too, like, even in the UFC, the entry level contract
yeah,
is usually 10,000 to show up and another 10,000 to win. And then you'll get a little bit through sponsorships and stuff
yeah,
like that. That's before paying your corners, paying taxes, and stuff like that. And so, even an entry level UFC fighter probably needs something else that's going to earn them money. So, like, they might be working. I know a lot of them work super part time jobs like coaching or something like that, where they can just get a few $100 a week. But it's tough having to juggle everything. You have family commitments, your work. If you're in school, like I was for a lot of it, and then too, even trying to have some semblance of a social life. and all that. Like it's tough. Like I got used to being the guy who would go out with my friends to the bar and be drinking, a sparkling water or something like that. And it's like it is definitely worth it if it's something you really want to do. But that is the reason why this isn't something that you can do halfway. It's like there's no, there really isn't any part-time fighting, even though you are actually part-time. But you need to have that mindset where that's what you are. That's why, like, I've always viewed fighter as being more of a personality type than a job description, because I've known a lot of competitive fighters who just aren't really fighters, just not mentally, like they just don't have it, and just like, and that's, unfortunately, those guys generally don't last. And so, like, it's the truly special ones that can bring all of that together. Like, I would say a good example of that on the scene right now is like, I would say it's Calvin Cater, who's been doing great in the UFC. One of the New England MMA guys. He's mentally tough as hell. He has all the physical gifts. He works his ass off, and there's a lot going on in his life. But he's able to pull it together because it's who he is. It's what he does. And obviously he's a special example because he's a genuine UFC star now. But like that behavior needs to already be in place, on the local scene. And he wouldn't have gotten to where he is if that weren't the case.
How many fighters do you coach at your gym?
So, I mean, it's kind of in flux. So based on the ones that I see privately right now, like 3 or 4 who I'll do like sort of private sessions with. But I have my hand in with just about everybody here. So I'm generally like the pad holder here. So I'm kind of the one who will help people with their striking and stuff like that. And I'll help them with their nutrition and then their lifting. And so pretty much everybody from the fight team at South Shore Sport Fighting, I help to some extent.
Oh, wow. That's great. There's a lot of them. A lot of talented people at that gym.
There are, and I'm like, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to work with all of them. I mean, like I said, a lot of what I know came from my experience working with this team.
How can people access your book? Where could they buy it?
So right now it is exclusively on Amazon for digital download. I am planning a print release in December, but right now, so it's just on Amazon. They can find it, there pretty easy.
Before we conclude with our interview, is there anything that you would like to share with everybody?
I would. God, that's a big question. And so honestly, I guess I would say, just for anybody listening who has any interest, whether you are a fighter, I'm assuming, like, if you listen to this, because I know your demographic, I'm assuming they have some interest, or just want to lose weight or do anything, that to really do that inner work so that they understand what it is they want, what they have to do to get it, and why they want it in the first place, because that why is so important, and that's going to be ultimately what's going to get you the result you want.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ryan, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. This was a good time.
Have a great night.
You too.